Good morning and greetings to all. This is the 30th session of the Faculty Development Program organized by East Wing, Directorate of Distance Education, Annamalai University, Tamil Nadu. It is time to welcome Professor Sebastian Joseph, Faculty, Department of History, UC College, Alava, Kerala. Welcome, sir. I am very delighted to introduce Dr. Sebastian Joseph. Dr. Sebastian Joseph is an environmental historian. He has to his credit a number of publications in the field of environmental history. He has authored a book on forest and the British technological imperialism in India, which won the Historia Award for the best book on modern Kerala history. Professor Sebastian Joseph, being a recipient of the British Council's Charles Wallace Award, in addition to that, he has recently received the Best Research Supervisor Award from the MP Paul Trust Kerala. He has published a lot of research papers on environmental history, family history, oral history, filmic history, local history, etc. He has delivered a lot of invited lectures, endowment lectures, and also chaired a lot of conferences, workshops, and seminars. During these COVID days, for the last 3-4 months only, he has delivered more than 30 video meetings. Professor Sebastian Joseph is ambitious, very ambitious, to become an internationally acclaimed writer and teacher in history. Currently, Professor Sebastian Joseph is teaching history in the Research Department of History, UG College, Alava, Kerala, and has been also acting as a General Secretary, Kerala History Congress. Professor Sebastian Joseph also serves as PhD examiner of various universities and research institutions, including Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Welcome, sir. Now the session is being handed over to Professor Sebastian Joseph.
Thank you very much, Professor Shankari, for the brilliant coordination. And thank you also Santosh sir and Rajamani sir for their technical support. So now today I'm going to start right now. I'm taking off by sharing my screen. I think you can see my screen.
Yes, sir.
And what I'm going to talk today is academic culture of interdisciplinary teaching. So without any further elaborate introduction or statement of the problem, I wish to refer to the first part of this lecture, that is concerning academic culture. Second part deals with disciplinarity or various forms and structures of discipline history with particularist mention. And finally, I will go to interdisciplinary teaching and then to the latest trends in interdisciplinary teaching. Thank you all for coming and joining with me. So what is academic culture? By academic culture, we mean it refers to the sum total of the attitudes, values, and ways of behaving and thinking that are common with a particular academic cluster. For example, a discipline, something like the history discipline. There is a shared commonality there. There are certain specific methods and methodologies which the folk, the fraternity of this academic discipline engage with. I wish to say that culture, I use culture as a metaphor to denote something like, a structural change in the mindset of the people who are coming into this particular cluster of discipline, that is history. So whenever we look at academic culture by the higher standard or by what I mean by the academic culture of higher education scenario is different from the kind of academic culture one is accustomed with in the lower divisions or lower classes. I mean, after the schooling, one student is coming to the university or college as a degree student, then his academic culture has to undergo a structural transformation or change and transition is to happen. And what are the parameters with which we understand this particular transition or transformation that is happening in the student? Four features are there. One is development of research skills of the student. One topmost priority of higher education is development of the research skill of the student. It can be developed through various exercises and engagements. The student can become one of the best in the particular discipline, or the student can move to different disciplines and gather methodologies and notions of knowledge forms from various disciplines and appropriate that to his discipline. In that sense, one student can develop his research standard and profile. So first and foremost, the most important criteria, the most important objective of any higher education academic culture is the development of the research skills of the students. Secondly, it is the development of critical thinking of the student. Because one of the criteria, one of the most important objective of the ancient Greek school was a development of this critical thinking enmeshed in science and philosophy. For example, if you go back to the times of the ancient Greeks who tried to develop a discipline by making some younger disciples sit in front of a senior teacher, and they engaged in a kind of discourse. I think you are aware of that. What was the cardinal feature of the Greek school was a thinking that went in the lines of a paradigmatic at the same time a syntagmatic way of process. So such a kind of a critical consciousness and thinking that developed through various stages. Sometimes it met with certain confrontation or a collision with certain orthodox tendencies like religion usurping the role of the teacher or disciplinary practices. Later, it broke its link with the religion and became very critical by adopting values from science and reason. So science and reason can be considered, cunning reason can be considered as the cardinal core values of higher education. So by science, I mean scientific rationality or a kind of scientific temperament. And reason is the detachment, the ability of a person to detach from the various doxas or kind of toxic affiliations a person is having with various factors which influence his personality. So the second most important criteria, which got institutionalized, established through the university systems, and which still maintains its primacy in higher education, the university system, higher education, is the development of critical thinking. Critical means it is not critical of a person or a system, but critiquing the systems and the individuals or whatever processes that we come across by using scientific procedural formalities and reasoning. So the second most important criteria for this type of a structural transformation is development of critical thinking. Now, one must not get away from the world that is the academic world, the present academic world. So an important thing for a student to develop in the academic culture of the modern universities, or sometimes we refer to as the postmodern universities, is is a kind of literacy which can be termed as a digital literacy, because everything is digitized in this world. Nobody knows about what kind of a methodology the historian is going to follow in the coming days. But anyway, whatever the methodology shift happens, a historian will have to use his scientific procedures, scientific way of looking at a problem, enmeshed in reason, enmeshed in critical reason and critical thinking. One has to come to term with, no doubt about that, one has to come to term with, despite the fact that you are still using the traditional. Whenever I use the term traditional, it doesn't mean that traditional is bad or traditional is backward in that sense. Traditional means any kind of method that you were using in the past. Yesterday, in that sense, become a tradition today. So in that sense, one of the most important area for the history student or the teacher to develop certain basic traits are connected with digital literacy. That's very important. And fourthly, all these abilities and all these critical knowledge forms and features of the student and the teacher should ultimately lead to the ability to communicate in a form that is very different from other disciplines. So these are the four most important objectives of higher education as far as when one joins for the higher education and finally go with a degree. Teachers have to bear in mind that your students, they have to stand apart. They are to be different in that sense, who with an absolutely brilliant research skills, who have the ability to critically think, systematically doubt and arrive at certain valid judgments, who are digitally competent or digitally literate, and finally, who are able to communicate the findings in a very interesting manner are the most important objectives of higher education. And this realization of this kind of goals and objectives shall be the primary objective of the academic culture with which a teacher is engaging in a university or in a college, because it all depends on the contingent nature of knowledge. Knowledge is always contingent, it is ever changing. So when one students come to a department in a college or a university, he is not interested, he will not be naturally interested in the kind of knowledge forms which he was used to, kind of knowledge forms with which he was accustomed to. Of course, there are valid knowledge forms, but the way in which people are taught in schools or higher secondary institutions are to undergo a structural transformation in the colleges and the universities. And the students are desirous of getting certain things which are different from the academic culture of the colleges and the universities. Here I present the importance of academic culture. So academic culture in some total, it is the shared milieu, shared cultural milieu. Milieu means environment of teachers, of students, and all academicians and administrators connected with building up a culture which is very critical for the continuation of human culture or human civilization on rational and scientific lines. So academic culture is very important in that sense, significant. Now, secondly, what is interdisciplinary teaching? Before going to interdisciplinary teaching, I wish to elaborate on what is a discipline after all. You are teaching history for maybe for 10 years or 20 years or even more than that. But when it comes to a discipline, very simple definition or common definition of discipline is it is a branch of learning or space where scholarly instruction is imparted. This is the conventional definition of discipline. But you see, if you go through some of the dictionaries, learned important dictionaries like Oxford or Cambridge or Collins Cobble, you see that this is the kind of definition that is given. Absolutely, there is no disagreement with that, but we need to elaborate that. And when we need to elaborate that, we come to a field where the student, the teacher, and then the researcher. See, these are three categories in higher education. The student who comes to graduate and then postgraduate, and then the teacher and the researcher. And sometimes the teacher and the student in one becomes the researcher. So that defines a particular academic field. It creates, if I take this word from Pierre Bourdieu, the habitus, it can be considered as an academic habitus. And an academic habitus is a habitus where the teachers and the students, both of them, how to engage critically with one another, interact, confront, complement, and compete for defining certain knowledge forms in that sense. So what is the speciality of this habitus is its ambience. Its ambience, like for example, if we take one of the best universities in India, for say, for example, JNU, and the habitus of JNU, if you look at the habitus of JNU, just for example, if you take the habitus of Center for Historical Studies, you can see a very democratic kind of transmission of knowledge, collaborative kind of transmission and sharing of knowledge, which is enmeshed in values of, values which will lead to liberation of the student and also the teacher. So finally, what is the aim of an academic habitus is emancipation of students. Emancipation in the sense that emancipation of the students from certain chained belief systems, certain chained knowledge forms, so that they are now free to create new knowledge forms in that sense. So in that sense, the academic habitus of higher education is supposed to detach from or makes its affiliation, it has to cut off its affiliation from the doxic tendencies, from the doxas. Doxa is again a term used by Pierre Bourdieu to denote, certain orthodox forms or orthodox values, which always stand as a way of impediment in the advancement of knowledge in that sense. Bourdieu uses it in a different scenario, but what I implicate by doxa or doxic elements, sometimes the toxic elements in higher education, are certain notions and misconceptions or misperceptions which limit the capacity of the student and the teacher to attain a full-fledged knowledge form in that sense. So creation of a full-fledged knowledge form, which is free, fair, and critical, which endorses and encompasses, appropriates other knowledge forms from the discipline itself, creates a different habitus. This is a culture of academics in a discipline. But how does it come? An academic habitus entails, specialized training. Specialized training in the methodology and art and craft of a discipline that would definitely lead to critical understanding of problems connected to the particular discipline. So what we focus here is, what we emphasize here is locating and generating knowledge forms related to particular forms of discipline. So the particularist discipline, methodology is actually what we are taught in a mono discipline scenario like that of history. But finally, there is a possibility that once you confront it with the different kinds of methods, methodologies, perspectives, and data, and all systems of thought, finally, what you create is a perspectival knowledge form, like Foucault said, which is a differentiated kind of knowledge form. So what you create, ultimately, the perspective of history is different from the perspective of economics, sociology, physics, or mathematics. They have a different perspective, and historian's perspective is different. Perhaps the historian's perspective is actually that is anchored in subjective affiliations in that sense. With objectivity, even though we should yearn for objectivity through scientism or scientific procedural formalities, attaining 100% objectivity is not a possible thing in history, because the past contains so many subjectivities. The past itself is subjective, then how can you make it objective is the problem. You can use a methodology which is objective, but the past is subjective. The forms of knowledge from the past is subjective. It is multi-layered, it is polyphonic, it is diverse. So while you use your objective methods, finally you come to a perspective which endorses all the subjectivities in it. It is not your subjectivity that I mean, but the subjectivity is connected with the past. So that is actually what is a perspective in historical discipline, which really makes the historical discipline unique and different. Qualitatively, a very higher kind of knowledge form when you compare with physics or chemistry or economics or sociology. And discipline-wise, you reach and land in an autonomous realm. That is to say about the autonomy of the discipline pertaining to the scholarship of history as a discipline. And you can see in this picture, very interesting picture, which I accessed from kaggle.com. You can see that this is the field of historians. You can see historians working with artifacts, machines, land. Historians are within the archives. You can see that historians are swimming through the data. You can see that some of the historians are talking to the dead, talking to the skeletons. And another historian is there, is something he invented. You can see he is, taking his hands apart and saying, I have invented something. And this is the field scenario of the historian. While you look at this scenario, what you understand from this scenario is a kind of disorder and chaos. This is a field of historian that is very different from the field of a scientist or a natural scientist or a physical scientist in that sense. While they have ordered systems, very structured systems like the laboratory, we have a system that is entirely in disorder. We are forced to work with this disorder, chaos, and diversities and arrive at certain knowledge forms. So this explains, this photograph explains, this caricature explains the multi-talented job of a historian as he confronts vexed, ambiguous, and totally invisible past through various fragments left over by the past itself. So this is the world of historian in the history discipline. And it goes to production of a structure of knowledge. See, first we have seen people, things, beliefs, methodologies connected to history discipline. Now you see that, you come to a particular structure of knowledge. A structure of knowledge in history is entirely different from the structure of knowledge in economics or other social sciences. There is a training domain in history which is particularistic, which is diverse, which is very different or differentiated from other kinds of domains. Because we are the only people who deal with the past. Of course, scientists collaborate with us in dealing with the past, but we are the particularistic people, the particular specific peoples and scholars who deal with the past. So there, when you become an academic folk like that, the identity of the teacher, identity of the student researcher, and identity of the administrator. By administrator, I mean the academic administrators, not the common bureaucratic administrators. Some of the academic administrators also behave like bureaucratic administrators. That is the problem with the present day. But when I mean administration, it is academic administration. For example, those who are engaging in syllabus making, like the board of studies or faculty boards or academic councils, known by various names in various universities, research boards, research committees, doctoral committees, all these things, examination boards, everything comes there. So an individual has to be trained in teaching, individual is to be trained in research, and an individual is to be trained in the art of administration also. And finally, the collective attempt and collective, work, the result of the work, finally reaches you as the educational output or the research output. When it reaches you as the research and educational output, you can see that culture. You understand that culture of the historian, how he is looking at the past, how he is seeing the world, how he is doing his work, and how he is creating knowledge. And this determines the scholarly behavior of the folk belonging to the discipline. This collectivity, you cannot take the individual apart. Of course, there are certain individual traits, individual good and bad in that sense. But you have to take the particular collective structural form of this knowledge in history. That's why I tell you, even though there are certain particular academic people and persons, collectively it denotes something like an academic tribe. You can call history teachers and students belonging to a particular academic tribe with a particular territory in that sense, who speak different languages. I don't mean speaking Latin or Greek, but speaking a language which is different from other social sciences and sciences. And finally, the entire folk become an academic tribe with an academic territory. And I wish that, if suppose someone of you want to read more on these aspects of academic tribe and academic territory, you can refer to Tony Becker and Paul R. Trowler's work entitled Academic Tribes and Territories. This is a very interesting work where one is exposed and introduced to the scenario of different types of academics and different types of lineages connected with academics. That's why he uses the term academic tribe. It's very interesting to term. Every like other tribes, everyone living in the world is a tribal. I think we are all tribals. We belong to different tribes. But academic tribe is a different tribe. A tribe which has got affiliation with a discipline. At the same time, a tribe which practices certain, methods or methodologies like certain rituals in that sense. Commonly shared milieu of culture of a tribe. That is why this book is entitled as Academic Tribes and Territories. And now the teak tree, how the botany teacher, for example, if you look at, different disciplines, how different disciplines look at, simply, for example, a teak tree, you are going to problematize that from the point of view of discipline. The botany teacher may perhaps look at the teak tree from the perspective of a botany teacher. He or she is not supposed to look at the teak tree from the perspective of a history teacher or a management teacher or a physics teacher in that sense, or an mechanical engineering teacher in that sense. So while the botany teacher looks at a teak tree, perhaps he or she is interested in understanding the taxonomy, understanding the different qualities of this particular species that is a teak timber, how it survives marine infection. That's why boats are made of teak tree, and so that a boat can survive almost more than 50 years without any marine infection in that sense. So there is a particularist lens of the botany teacher or the forestry teacher in that sense, one who study forest sciences, one who study mechanical engineering in that sense, And then the management teacher perhaps may look at the quantity of the timber, collected, the profit, accumulated from such a trade of timber. And finally, the history teacher comes, and what the history teacher has to do with the teak tree. Perhaps the history teacher engages the teak tree with a different language, with a different methodology, and understand the relationship between teak tree and the making of colonialism in India. How the teak tree facilitated advancement of colonialism in India, how the teak tree led to forest reservation policy in India, that is the entire of the forest, good forest containing teak and other valuable trees were reserved by the British government in the year 1865. It is just because of the teak tree, their desire to corner and monopolize the use of the teak tree, how they use the teak tree, the teak timber for expanding railway network, how the empire was built on the tree. So the meaning of the tree differs in that sense. So while you pass through different disciplines from botany to mechanical engineering, management, and history, every discipline has got a lens of frame or a frame of mind with which they look at a particular concept or a thing. This is just a tree. If this is a tree, how the history teacher is to look at the systems different from the teak tree. For example, how the history teacher is to look at the revolution, how the history teacher is to look at the gender affiliations and gender differentiations, how the history teacher is to look at agrarian protest movements in that sense. So the criteria or the structure of knowledge entails the teacher, the researcher, and the teacher to look at a particular concept or a thing from the viewpoint, from the frame of lens of the history discipline. This is a particularist form of understanding a discipline. Now we come to multidisciplinary approach in teaching. Multidisciplinary approach, you look at the term multidisciplinary. Multiple disciplines are coming into the fray and approaching. And some of the educators and theoreticians argue that multidisciplinary is, of course, disciplinary, in the sense that it does not make any change in the discipline. It only draws certain perspectives to illustrate a topic or a theme or issue that the particular person in the discipline is handling or engaging. Here, a topic is viewed from the epistemology epistemology of more than one discipline. This is to study and elaborate a problem with the support from other disciplines. It brings together only multiple dimensions. And the major point that you have to understand in this scenario of multidisciplinary approach, it is not interdisciplinary approach. It is pakka disciplinary approach, where knowledge production is always determined and structured by the driving discipline. That is, which discipline is using. For example, the teacher in history uses economics, politics, sociology for elaborating or illustrating a particular theme or an issue. That is multidisciplinary, but multidisciplinary finally strengthens the argument of the particular individual in the particular discipline. So the particularity of the disciplinarian practice is not lost. It is not abandoned. It is not neglected. Instead, disciplinary elements always retain the originality. Here, the originality belongs to the history discipline. So in our case, since it is history, I am specifically mentioning to history. If it is sociology, it is sociology. Okay. One example I can suggest is that the study of social formations in Tamilagam. How do you study social formations in Tamilagam? In a multidisciplinary approach, the host discipline is history. And the co-host disciplines are, or complementary disciplines are, archaeology, anthropology, and sociology, sometimes economics, sometimes political science. But you come to strengthen the argument of history. The host discipline gets the share of its profit in that sense in unionization, in association with other disciplines. So this is multidisciplinary approach. For expanding the terrain of social formations in Tamilagam, you are drawing certain inferences and insightful references from archaeology, anthropology, sociology. They are only co-host disciplines or complementary disciplines. And the nature of the knowledge that is created belongs to the host discipline, that is history. I hope you understand that. Without negating and nullifying the disciplinary elements of the core discipline, that is the host discipline. This is called a multidisciplinary approach. This is not interdisciplinary, and this is not transdisciplinary in that sense. This is a multidisciplinary approach. This illustration will make you understand what is a multidisciplinary approach. You can see disciplines from A, B, C, D, E. All the disciplines, the theoretical arguments from B, C, D, and E are taken by discipline A in order to expand, in order to illustrate, in order to strengthen argument, a research topic in discipline A. But even when it draws from discipline B, C, D, and E, the unique character of the discipline A is not lost. It is intact. It is retained. It has retained the disciplinary elements. I hope you understand from this diagram. Now, we go to pluridisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, and transdisciplinary approaches. What is pluridisciplinary approach? Pluridisciplinary approach entails, the use of large-scale expertise, expert knowledge from a broad range of disciplinary domains. So it can crisscross any discipline in that sense. It is not a particularist thing. It can crisscross. That approach need not be a particularist approach for history or economics or sociology. It cross the borders and use expertise from a wide range of disciplinary domains. This is pluridisciplinary. And again, there is a concept which is called cross-disciplinary, because the cross-disciplinary means, there is a shared commonality between two disciplines, and what comes in the intersection of these multiple disciplines are taken to elaborate and signify a research topic. This is cross-disciplinary. One is crossing the discipline in that sense to other discipline, because other discipline and disciplinary in practice knowledge forms have got a shared commonality with the discipline that you are working with. This is cross-disciplinarity. And finally, I think the present world is more concerned with the transdisciplinary these days than interdisciplinary, because transdisciplinary moves away from the disciplinary terrain to wide goals and applications. It looks at integrating the disciplinary knowledges under the rubric of a unity of knowledge. Here, a transdisciplinary, I think more than interdisciplinary, most of the scholars are engaged in transdisciplinary studies these days, because how to make these knowledge forms useful for the society, how to go out of the discipline domain of A, B, C, D, and E to the society is the ultimate aim and objective of transdisciplinary studies. For example, how the outcome of a discipline, how the report of a discipline, finding of a discipline is used in a policy document. That's a transdisciplinary. Once the discipline transcends into a governmental regime who are drafting a policy on a forest bill or environmental protection bill, how they are using inputs from environmental history. This is transdisciplinary. So, multidisciplinary, pluridisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, and transdisciplinary draws, use, and they systematically engage with these particular common fields of research, and they associate with common traits in that sense, but we don't find an integration of knowledge at a higher level that makes all these approaches different from interdisciplinarity. Now I can show you, I can illustrate this with, with diagrams which are specific to cross-disciplinary. Now you can see cross-disciplinary practice here. You can see two disciplines, A and B. A certain area in the intersection of these two disciplines are studied and elaborated by drawing inferences both from discipline A and discipline B. So there, what is that discipline is discipline C. For example, if a problem in political economy is studied with certain inputs from history and economics, or history and political science, then that political economy became an offshoot of history, economics, and political science. Here there are only two disciplines, but in the case of a three discipline, again, such intersections may occur. So this is cross-disciplinary approach, cross-disciplinary research methodology, which is used to implement certain methodologies which are shared by two disciplines, which occur at an intersection. This is cross-disciplinarity. And then comes, this is transdisciplinarity. You can see that discipline A, B, C, D, and E are engaged in the production of knowledge forms. While they are not integrating themselves, they are not having any network which relate these disciplines, but all of them, the findings and result of the entire disciplines are taken for arriving at a research topic or a problem which does not belong to any of these disciplines, but drawing inferences, drawing elemental qualities from all these disciplines. This is called transdisciplinarity. The research topic here is external to the disciplines. That's why I told you with reference about a governmental policy and how the methods and methodologies and outcome of research are used for framing a particular governmental law or a regulation. This is called a transdisciplinarity. So now you look at all these, there is a table I have given in this. You can see that in single disciplinary, you can see that it is highly specialized one discipline. There is no cooperation with other disciplines and development of detailed new disciplines. That is, because of your work in this particular field, you develop a detailed new discipline of history in that sense. Sometimes new history is emerging in that sense, the term new history. This is the end result of a single disciplinary approach. While you look at the multidisciplinary approach, people from different disciplines, they work together each drawing on their disciplinary knowledge. But the thing is that they are not focused on problem solving, but requires only expert opinions. They are drawing from other disciplines in order to illustrate and augment a point of view for their discipline, not for other disciplines. So members cooperate in their contributions, but do not integrate in their perspective. There is no integration of perspectives. Perhaps that may lead to a disciplinary theory in that sense from the multidisciplinary point of view. And then comes transdisciplinary, that is in the fourth column, I have given the transdisciplinary. It creating a unity of intellectual frameworks beyond the disciplinary perspectives. So it goes to the benefit of the non-practitioners of academia, for example, the non-academia, and new knowledge is generated through these use of multi and interdisciplinary concepts. Here they use both multi and interdisciplinary concepts and considered as the highest form of integration of all actors in a participatory management system. So that is transdisciplinary, which is intellectual, but more than intellectual, it is more related to the practice-oriented kind of research. How this research and outputs from research can be made use for the society. But interdisciplinary is different from all these. I will come to this slide later, or you can go to the slide later for understanding how you differentiate interdisciplinary kind of method and approach from other kinds of methods. And what is interdisciplinary approach? There are so many definitions about interdisciplinarity. Divergent definitions are there. Vexing definitions are there because this is a highly problematic field of methodology. So interdisciplinary studies should ask complex or vexing questions that cannot be answered adequately within the boundaries of a given discipline. Usually these questions come from a very higher level of epistemology. Interdisciplinary is to be used in order to address a very ambiguous problem, which can be elaborated only through integration of different disciplinary perspectives. Here comes the question of integration and synthesization. So because the interdisciplinary scholar is a fantastic scholar in his own discipline, that is why he comes to the edge of his discipline. He looks for all the niceties and intricacies connected with the methodologies in one's own discipline, its knowledge forms, and comes to the edge of the discipline, his own discipline, in order to transcend into the real outside. He wants to critically analyze an explanation. He wants to critically analyze and come to a problem which can be elaborated through integration of different disciplines. So interdisciplinarity in that sense, it cut pathways for new methodologies and new areas. Interdisciplinarity finally creates a new methodology, a new method form, a methodological form, which ultimately land the historian or the teacher in a particular new area. This is a higher level integration there. This is not a commonsensical level of integration because it also sheds light on new sources, on new readings, different from current standards in the discipline. Because the readings from the current standards in the discipline are not compatible. They are not successful in analyzing the problem. That is a problem. So it's a higher level cognitive interdisciplinarity. Here I wish to differentiate between two kinds of interdisciplinarity. One is instrumental interdisciplinarity or a utilitarian kind of interdisciplinarity, where most of the technocrats and people working in nanotechnology are using this particular, or people working in AI, that is artificial intelligence, are more concerned about this kind of a utilitarian interdisciplinarity, where a robot is made, fabricated or made, and a robot serves the purpose of the human. Ultimately, you can see the neurosciences is integrating with the nanosciences or robotic sciences. How the robotic science is becoming a new kind of scientific phenomenon. That this is a kind of utilitarian kind of interdisciplinarity. Whereas a historian is not going to implement this kind of instrumental or a utilitarian kind of interdisciplinarity. What is the interdisciplinarity that specifically addresses historical issues are a higher level cognitive interdisciplinarity, a higher level thinking interdisciplinarity, the results of such an understanding are unattainable through monodisciplinary practices or multidisciplinary practices. So there comes the importance of two types of interdisciplinarity. One is a theoretical realm of interdisciplinarity, where new theories are invented, or old three theories are restructured and reconfigured, and new areas emerge in disciplines concerning new areas. For example, one field that emerged in history is the field of mentalities. That is a new aerial interdisciplinarity. That is not what Roland Barthes comments as a separate interdisciplinary subject, which belongs to none of the disciplines, but it belongs to history. But it is a subject, it is a school which addresses historical problems at a higher cognitive level. So integration happens at a very higher level in this kind of a higher level in the disciplinarity, which is called cognitive interdisciplinarity and not instrumental or utilitarian interdisciplinarity. Now comes the famous quote of Roland Barthes, the famous author of The Pleasure of Text, where he describes about the death of the author and birth of the reader. One who can be considered as a French theoretician of languages and texts and also culture. He has elaborately worked on all codes of communication, like even the dress. Or one of the finest book of Roland Barthes is Camera Lucida, how camera interprets things in that sense. So such a highly, erudite scholar with vast sensibilities, acquired in him. He defines interdisciplinary work, so much discussed these days, is not about confronting already constituted disciplines, none of which, in fact, is willing to let itself go. He points to the orthodox element prevalent in the disciplines. The discipline wants to maintain its status quo. Some of the historians, history teachers, they said that, now whatever be the changes in history, we will be doing only political history. We will be using only one eye of history, like Richard Hakluyt mentioned, two eyes are there. One is geography and one is chronology. And some of us use only chronology. We are not concerned with geography. That is a subject matter of the geographer or the person who is studying geology. None of the business for the historian to look into that. Then how can you look at history? One eye is lost in that sense. So that is what Barthes suggests, that they are not willing to let itself go. They are not willing to deconstruct their learning practices and knowledge terrain in that sense. They are not having any sensibility towards a system or a concept of a de-learning. See, if you want to learn something, you have to de-learn something, no? Or else if you strictly restrict yourself with your learning strategies and theories, which you have already gathered, then there is no scope of a growth of a scholar. So if a growth of a scholar is to happen, he or she should be willing to de-learn, engage in de-learning. So what is Barthes meaning here? What does Barthes implicate here is that the scholars, some of the scholars, they are very adamant, and they're not going to let history go like that. No, history should be history, proper history like that. But what Roland Barthes argue, to do something interdisciplinary is not enough to choose a subject, a theme, or gather around it two or three sciences. Sciences means social sciences or sciences, whatever if you like that. The history teacher or researcher is saying that, of course, I am using field political science and economics. So I am interdisciplinary. No, you are only multidisciplinary. That means you are only disciplinary in that sense. That is what Barthes pertains. And he comes to this basic, most crucial understanding of interdisciplinarity when he elaborates it as interdisciplinary consists in creating a new object that belongs to no one. I repeat, interdisciplinary consists in creating a new object that belongs to no one. So what is that object? That is a point of view that we need to discuss here. So if you go rigorously by the tradition of Roland Barthes, by the definitional criteria of Roland Barthes, then there are only very few interdisciplinary study areas. Can you name some of the interdisciplinary study areas? One is gender studies. That is an interdisciplinary. It belongs to history, it belongs to sociology, economics, philosophy, technology, and all, psychology, and all. You look at environmental studies. It belongs to history, politics, ecology, human ecology. It belongs to zoology, biology, and all. So this is a true sensibilities regarding interdisciplinarity. There is history, there is political science, there is sociology, and there are different kind of methods which you draw from different disciplines, which you integrate and condense and create a new discipline. But the new discipline or the form of the new object does not belong to any of these disciplines. This is a remarkable definition from Roland Barthes. So if you look at it in that sense, the illustration goes like this. You can see that discipline A, history, discipline E, English, discipline D, philosophy, discipline C, film, discipline B, technology, produces film studies. Film studies come under cultural studies. That's a terrain in that sense. So cultural studies or film studies does not belong to any of these disciplines. It belongs to history, it belongs to technology, it belongs to political science, it belongs to economics. There is an economics of film viewing is there. There's a technology of film exhibiting is there. There is a history for understanding the development and evolution of history, historical films or any other kind of films. So film studies pertain, with a unique characteristic of an interdisciplinary study. If you take environmental studies, in that sense, if that is an interdisciplinary terrain, then discipline A is history, discipline B is botany, discipline C is zoology, discipline D technology, discipline E any kind of science. For example, forestry, it leads to, or economics, it leads to environmental studies. So a discipline or an object or a study area which belongs to none of these disciplines and gets disaffiliated from any of the disciplines, existing disciplines, from where theories or arguments or knowledge forms or methods and methodologies are drawn, entail and ultimately create a particular school of thought or an object which is called an interdisciplinarity. This is the definitional criteria of a Roland Barthes. But if you go by the Roland Barthian way, then that means, some problems are there, even in spite of the fantastic nature of his definition. So I put before you a definition that is given by a widely quoted definition of interdisciplinary studies, which came out in 1998, two educators, Klein and Nivell. They define interdisciplinary study as a process of answering a question, solving a problem, or addressing a topic that is too broad or complex to be dealt with adequately by a single discipline or profession. It draws on disciplinary perspectives and integrates their insights through construction of a more comprehensive perspective. And this is the most generally accepted definition of interdisciplinary study. It should answer a question which is not, which cannot be resolved through any other methodology. To solve a problem, and through solving a problem, you are addressing a topic that is too broad, ambiguous, and inextricably connected with, so many what you call differences and diversities in that sense, which comes beyond the scope of a discipline to resolve, is the perspective that is well integrated through insightful inferences and references from many disciplines, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 disciplines, which ultimately produce a comprehensive perspective is called interdisciplinarity, in the words of Klein and Nivell, two educators who wrote an essay by the name Advanced Interdisciplinarity in the year 1998. Now, this being the contextual background of disciplinary practices and interdisciplinary practices, I wish to tell you something about the qualities essential for an interdisciplinary teaching. What are the qualities essential for an interdisciplinary teaching is that the teacher should have a sound knowledge in the discipline. If you want to become an interdisciplinary teacher, a teacher who uses interdisciplinary teaching methodology, the first and foremost thing is that you should have a sound knowledge in the discipline. Whatever be the knowledge, and at the same time, you should have a willingness to go both vertically and horizontally in the discipline terrain. For example, when you teach that, something like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. You should insert it, the text like, subverting it like that. You should bring an orange a day keeps the doctor away. A watermelon a day keeps the doctor away. Vegetables, you consume vegetables and keep the doctor away. There are umpteen number of what you call disagreements with this statement. So this is what actually taught by the Greek philosophers also. You have to think paradigmatically and syntagmatically, vertically and horizontally. You have to cut a problem. When suppose somebody is asking you, what is a car? You can, of course, give the answer in varied forms. A car is having 4 tires. It is having an engine, carburetor, or a multiple fuel injector, 4 seats or 5 seats or 6 seats, then a steering. It is the shape of the car is like that. But that is not the ultimate meaning of a car. A car is also a social instrument in that sense. A car enables people to move in speed and to reach at a particular station and to take part in a protest meeting. Then the meaning of the car changes. Okay? It mobilizes people when an agitation is happening. So car become a social product in that sense. It become a social phenomenon in that sense. Okay, so that is why I tell you, I wish to refer to the, I think that particular sentence of Chomsky I discussed in last class. Chicken is ready to eat, how the meaning differs from time to time. So it is the willingness and ability of the teacher to go vertical as well as horizontal in the discipline terrain to cut across different disciplines to create new meanings. So one is sound knowledge in the discipline. One should have an empirical grip of the discipline. See, whatever things you say, even now, without the data, without the sound understanding of the sources, you can never be an interdisciplinary in that sense. Those who interdisciplinary practitioners, sometimes misinterpret interdisciplinarity as something very philosophical in that sense. If you want to become philosophical, you should have a grip of the data. You should have a grip of the sources in that sense. You are an empirical teacher in that sense first, and then only you can become a philosophical teacher in that sense. So sound knowledge in the discipline, willingness and ability to go vertical as well as horizontal in the discipline terrain, then grip of the data, there is sound knowledge about the data. Then finally, an interdisciplinary practitioner should be able to understand different paradigms in the world, for which they should have at least, an understanding of 2 or more theories, theoretical knowledge. Only through that, you can effectively apply a theory and also reconfigure a theory in some sense. Sometimes the theory gets internalized into your teaching scenario, writing a thesis or a lecture, whatever we like that. A theory is not something that stands apart from you. It has to come from within. That is why you have to have a sound knowledge. You have to have a sound, a firm grip on the data, and you have to have a thorough understanding about certain knowledge terrains, especially related to theories in that sense. So understanding the premises of historical knowledge and making and locating the subject problem within the paradigm, because the paradigm is changing. You cannot address an environmental historical problem from a paradigm that existed in 1970, 1950, and that is different in 1970 when the paradigm changed to that of a planetary consciousness. Now again, the paradigm changed. The pandemic is a paradigm now. Okay, the virus has determined the new paradigms in that sense to look at the same data from a different perspective. So the data remain the same, but the views starts fluctuating, because always the historian is on a slippery domain. Once he has got some stability in that slippery domain, thanks to the data, thanks to the theoretical knowledge, and thanks to the grip of the data, you can have a reasoned imagination. A reasoned imagination of the historian that looks beyond the usual skills of imagination in historical research, and that leads to knowledge making at a higher level. So we must say that, to sum and substance, disciplinarity without interdisciplinarity is blind. There is no orientation for a discipline. See, of course, you have got a lot of data and you are writing a thesis with full of data. What is the orientation of that? There is no theorization, there is no integration, there is no logical connectedness, there is no perspective. Then it is just a bundle of data. So that is why disciplinarity without interdisciplinarity is blind. And interdisciplinarity without disciplinarity is empty. That you have all the theories, you have all philosophical juxtapositions, and you have all arguments, brilliant arguments with you drawing from other disciplines, but your disciplinarian capacity is empty. The data from your discipline is empty. So this is a most important, statement that is concerning interdisciplinarity. Disciplinarity without interdisciplinarity is blind, and interdisciplinarity without disciplinarity is empty. I am quoting it as a variant form of a definition that is given about the concepts and content by Immanuel Kant. Now, interdisciplinary teaching and learning. So when you come to interdisciplinary instruction, it encourages the use integration of methods and analytical frameworks from more than one discipline to examine a theme, issue, topic, and it pushes the student. When it comes to interdisciplinary in teaching, once you are trained in the interdisciplinary research, it pushes your teacher in you to the frontiers of the knowledge, different frontiers of the knowledge. Like that, when you take that and implement inside the classroom, it pushes the student also beyond the scheme of the affiliated discipline. Both the teacher and the student are now beyond the scheme, the set scheme of the affiliated discipline. It synthesizes, integrate perspectives, methods, and methodologies for crafting a different framework for the chosen discipline. And that can be practiced in the classroom. How do you make your classroom interdisciplinary? You have to make a lot of premeditated thoughts about that, how to make your classroom, into a fantastic scenario of interdisciplinarity. You have to think a lot about projecting an issue before the students while you discuss a revolution, while you discuss an upheaval, while you discuss international movement, whatever be the problems, while you discuss about the plantations, history of plantations, you can go interdisciplinary in that sense. So the teacher has to do certain exercises before going to the classroom, how to present the theme from a very variegated type of perspective in that sense, which only through that, you can introduce a new methodology to the students. The methodology with which the students are familiar, it has to change. And finally, when it comes to feedback and assessments, and most of the foreign universities, they have a very different kind of feedback and assessment for fulfilling the courses, the objectives of the courses in interdisciplinary studies. Some examples which you can draw in the way of practicing interdisciplinarity inside the classroom is that, for example, when you discuss the issue of the fall of Mughals, about the Jagradari crisis, the Mansabdari crisis, why can't you put the body of the Mughal nobility, the imperial service in front of the student to say a few words about, the body factor. The body becomes a metaphor. With reference to the study, the brilliant article written by Rosalind regarding the body factor of the Mughal imperial service, which retained the power of the emperor. And Aurangzeb was absent in North India for a long time. He was in Deccan. Then the image of the body was, tarnished in that sense. The Semindar had a body, the Jagradar had a body, gestures, the militarized body, the body splinter, body becoming a facade in that sense. Okay, right? So a same problem that you were studying can be approached through integrating political history, economic history, social history with the history of the aesthetics, sensibilities of the body in that sense. This is a higher level cognition is happening. Then the students also will be interested in you because they have already heard, studied all these 3-4 factors in their school days. Now again, you are repeating the same 4 factors. Then what is new in that? You have to add on. You have to add on to the already established factors in a very different dimension. That's why I took the idea of the issue of the fall of Mughals and the question of body as a metaphor. Then bringing a cup of tea. Even bringing a cup of tea is a problematic thing for a historian. You're going to a particular place, a hotel, and asking for a tea. When you take the cup of tea, history also comes with that, isn't it? How it became a beverage. Then you go to environmental history. You go to the history of drinks, beverages. You go to the history of economics. You go to the history of aesthetics, how the hills of India were remodified in that sense. You are drinking tea because of land reconfiguration. It is because of the aesthetics of the British men in creating gardens in Nilgiris and Munnar and all. Okay? So within that, beyond the T curve, there is an inextricably interrelated constellation of factors which made the teacup possible in that sense. The teacup itself became a culture tag for the historian. You have to synthesize different disciplines, drawing from aesthetics and drawing from history of beverages and history of diet and drinks in that sense. And viewing a cinema, again, it becomes a problem for an interdisciplinary kind of understanding inside a classroom. The last class I mentioned about the rickshaw car, okay, right? When you see the film, you see particular motives are coming. There is scope for a film history. There is scope for integrating technology. There is scope for integrating semiotics or motives, study of motives from the film. So that is well integrated into your classroom. So these are some of the practice lessons with which you can understand interdisciplinary culture inside the classroom, which lead to what is called significant learning. What time is it now? 12? 9. Okay. The outcome of interdisciplinary teaching is significant learning. One important thing is that most of the interdisciplinary theoreticians say that the teacher and the student, they recognize the bias in one's discipline once you go interdisciplinary. Because as I already told you, the habitus of that interdisciplinary practice is entirely different from the habitus of the monodisciplinary practice. The teacher and the student both recognize their bias. It is not religious or communal or whatever be the bias, but the bias of the discipline, the regimented pattern of the discipline, the well-structured, rigorous methodology of the discipline is critical. And through integrating other disciplines, one can understand the discipline's own bias in that sense. Why I am a biased historian in that sense? Because I looked only through the lens of history in that sense. Why I am a biased history teacher? Because I looked only to the lens of history teacher. The student can also think in that sense. So that leads to overcoming the notions regimented within this single discipline. It opens thought process of the teacher. It opens thought process of the students to vast and critical world of teaching and learning. Both become two different characters, once they assimilate these kind of traditions from interdisciplinarity. So as I told you, one of the most important objectives of the higher education is to develop the critical thinking of the student. So this helps in advancing the critical thinking and promote cognitive development of the student very well. It emancipates the student from the hegemonic ways of the discipline-based thinking. Finally, it leads to significant learning. The learning outcome can be defined as normal learning outcome and significant learning outcome. Significant learning outcome is a really revolutionary kind of learning outcome, which is different from the outcomes which you enlist. So ultimately, only through this kind of interdisciplinary practice inside the classroom, inside examination, inside assessment, inside feedback, and in your daily routinized interaction and association with your student folk, the outcome leads to significant learning. And you all very well know about this kind of a significant learning practice, which emanated from an academic culture which was very different from the normal academic culture of the day, that led to the creation of the Annals School. How the Annals School became interdisciplinary in that sense. Why they are credited with a total history which integrated different methodologies from different sciences, different social sciences, languages, all kinds of social sciences and languages, and even from sciences in that sense. It opened the scheme of history. It broke the shell of the orthodoxy of history. Like Mark Bloch and Lucien Favre commented in the preface to the first edition of the Annals in 1929. It is our duty to raise our wall of protest against the deep schisms that exist in social sciences. So they made a culture of interdisciplinarity. If you look through the works of Mark Bloch, Fernand Braudel, Robert Mandrou, or Jean-Claude Schmidt, you can see that when you look at royal touch, how a simple touch of the royal, the king was problematized by using methods from psychohistory, by using methods from economics, by using methods from miracles, that means the study of magic, folkloristics. How the touch became a fossilized relic in the minds of the people. How Bloch was able to explain that, because he followed an integration of different disciplines. This is cognitive interdisciplinarity. This is not instrumental interdisciplinarity. See, in elaborating and discussing a research problem, a touch phenomena which is beyond the scope of historical methodology. How Brodel problematized the Mediterranean. He was drawing inferences from economics. He was drawing inferences from trade. He was drawing inferences from philosophy. He was drawing inferences from linguistics, from anthropology, from geography. Okay? He was drawing inferences from all these disciplines and integrated that in order to depict the Mediterranean world as different from other historians did. That is why he was able to cut across the frontiers of knowledge to go back to a total historical outlook in that sense. And you look at the Holy Greyhound, that's a wonderful work which talks about the story of a saint. And here the saint is not a man, not a human being, but the saint is a dog. You should go through this work. I am not having time to go through all the narration of this work, because the Holy Greyhound talks about the death of a dog, and finally the death of a dog at the hands of a knight who mercilessly killed him, despite the fact that the dog tried to save his child's life from a serpent, and finally people started believing in the dog. And the dog, so many ritual practices started emerging in France in the 13th century around this dog. And the dog became Saint Guayford. He became a Saint Guayford. Guayford became a healer of children since 13th century. So it talks about traditions, it talks about folklore, it talks about medical practices. It brings in the question of belief, collective consciousness, mentality. What is the mentality of a given people at a given point of time? The historians were able to understand that through integrating, synthesizing methodologies from psychology, economics, other social sciences, and even sciences and philosophy and linguistics in order to explain a phenomena which was a commonsensical kind of thing for other historians. Otherwise, the touch would have been the royal touch, the divine touch, nothing more than that. The Mediterranean would have been a sea, nothing more than that. Guyneford would have been just a greyhound, not a holy greyhound. So how they problematized that and how they arrived at latest, recent trends in explaining the phenomena, it is thanks to their highly cognitive kind of interdisciplinarity. Now you can also look at the work of Joanna Bourke, who wrote Fear, a Cultural History. Here, she used all documents, medical documents, psychiatric documents, and despite all archival documents to denote the fact, to implicate that the emotion of Britain during the Second World War, the national emotion of Britain was fear. Entirely, the history of fear is charted exposed through this kind of an integration of disciplines and high kind of cognitive interdisciplinarity. Joanna Bourke, who wrote Fear, a Cultural History. Now coming to the last part of my presentation, now you can look at a different kind of interdisciplinary practice which is emerging thanks to the changes and advancements in technologies, which is called digital pedagogies in that sense. Out of digital pedagogies, which takes clues and cues from pedagogic knowledge, technological knowledge, and content knowledge. Technological knowledge of a software engineer, pedagogic knowledge of an educator, and content knowledge of a historian. They can engage in certain digital pedagogies, whereby we have a new kind of a branch of history now, which as of all of you may be knowing that digital history. This also leads to not just digital history, which may also leads to a kind of digital interdisciplinarity. And digital history examines and presents the past with the new information technologies, networks, and software systems. As all of you know, there are a lot of digital spaces where one can see this kind of digital history is not use of digital technologies that one must understand. That is a way of using that, but it is the kind of representing the past through digital technologies. You can of course study from that, but digital history is largely concerned with the work of digitizing the past and presenting it in a very different form, which can be considered as an experiential level of history. It has opened new arena of scholarly history production and communication, and it leads to the creation and codification of new course materials and also data collection. It entails a departure from the methodology by using the power of the hypertext or the hypertextual power in digitizing the past, leading to an experiential kind of history. Here, the basic characteristic of the historiography undergoes change. The tone and tenor of the nature of the historiography undergoes structural transformation with this new approach. But basically, when I was looking through these documents, I found that there is a second wave now, which talks about an interdisciplinary kind of collaboration among historians, programmers, software experts, information architects, designers, and publishers in joining for a new model of scholarship in a digital history. For example, if you go to the website, you can see the September 11 archive. You know about September 11, 2001, the destruction caused to humanity on September 11. In America, there is an excellent digital archive, which is called the September 11 archive, which contains more than 150,000 first-hand accounts, despite so many photographs, videos, and memories. And very interesting to note that if you go to this website, you can also have a journey through the Voice 9.11, which comprises of personal collection of video testimonies of people who witnessed the event. So what we understand history through reading is not hearing history through personal testimonies. It's a new way, a new kind of experiential level of interdisciplinary collaboration of technology and oral history in that sense, particularly oral history. And there is also, you can look at the site address that I have given in this slide. This belongs to the Stanford University. There is a particular a pictorial representation of a title, From Forest to Vineyards, the Changing Landscape of Brazil. It talks about the changes in Brazil, which happened with the settlement of the German immigrants, and how the plantation system of Brazil got developed, how it led to monoculture plantations, and how these particular group of digital historians mapped the landscape, which truly represent the kind of landscape transformation that happened. So while you go through the maps or while you go through archival documents, you don't get a feel of this particular transformation happened in Brazil. Say, for example, if you look at this from the point of view of transformation happened in Nilgiris, you'll be able to understand, how you can understand through digital mapping and digital configurations, one can realize the structural changes, configurations happened in the Nilgiris or in the Munnar in Kerala. And then similar to that, there is another digital history collective, which is called the California Time, which comprises a digital presentation of different kind of photographs, which talks about the landscape changes. Both are related to environmental historical sites, because I have checked these sites and found it to be very useful, and one can understand. It is not just, I'm citing this as a reference for digital history, but this is the kind of creative imagination in collaboration with the technocrats and the historian, a new field that is being developed these days. Now, the next day, you should not talk like this, take out your phones, open the American history app and turn to the page about George Washington. This should not be the style. This is not digital history. This is use of digital history by the teacher. If the teacher wants to become a digital historian, a teacher in Tamil Nadu should definitely try for that, or in Kerala even. You can talk about the changes in the urban morphology, the urban landscape of Chennai, for example. How, with the coming of the colonizer, the Chennai cities changed its face. How different structures came, how different monuments and the buildings came, how streets were renamed, how big streets came. So how you can understand the colonial vestiges of power through these streets by projecting it into the video, by transferring the documents into a visual narrative in that sense. That is what I mean. Even you can do it with reference to certain inscriptions like the Uttarameru inscriptions of Parantaka Chola, about local administration and all, connecting it with the modern day local administration, some type of, going to backward and coming forward in that sense, how local administration in Tamil Nadu can be studied through this digitization and visualization effects. And not to cite it as just a site for understanding, for giving the students to take notes on. That should not be the culture of academics. And there are various, digital history repositories. I have given the address of the digital history repositories here. All of these repositories are in Europe and USA because they have far advanced in this kind of historical sensibility. We lag behind in spite of the technological advancements in India. In this case, we need a new orientation, new policy towards these kind of issues. So also I can also recommend a book for you to read. It is Cleo Wired, written by one of the most important digital historian, Roy Rosenzweig. Rosenzweig, he wrote Cleo Wired, the future of the past in the digital age. This you can refer if you want to get more information about digital history. Now with the last slide, I wish to stop this presentation. This is an allegory of the cave. Some of the teachers of history might have read about Plato's allegory of the cave. Here you can see this is a cave. Inside a cave, some people are sitting there. You can see they are chained to the ground. They cannot move backward, leftward, or right because their heads are also chained. They cannot move. They cannot see each other. They can only see just at the side of a wall, a rock wall in front of them. And they are seeing certain images of people who are moving with certain objects in the background. That is the roadway there. Some people are moving there. And there is a fire in the background. Then a reflection happening. And that goes to the other side of the cave wall, where these individuals who are chained, who cannot move left or right or back, they are destined to see the image that is projected onto the screen. So what I wish to say is that this allegory of the cave, which was described by Plato in the Republic, talks about one person ultimately, liberating from this particular cave and going out and seeing things differently. So he comes to the tree as tree, he comes to the elephant as elephant, he comes to human being as human being. But when the images were reflected on the wall of the cave where they were chained, was an image that was constructed because of the fire and its refraction or reflection on the wall. So this kind of a banking education where one is disciplined inside a discipline, and one who retains, the teacher who retains only the monodisciplinary theoretical strands, are chaining the students and projecting certain things before them, like the banker is doing, like the example that we drew from the, we may draw from the banking system of education. You are investing some capital, and capital in the forms of examinations or notes or lectures, and these students are just replicating that. So only if you shift from your methodology inside the classroom, only if you take to the new ways of a highly cognitive kind of interdisciplinarity, interdisciplinary teaching practices, the students can liberate from the chains and they can create a world of their own. There, new histories are written, new methodologies are invented, and new structures and forms of knowledge are generated. So that's all about in this lecture. I think I took 1 hour 20 minutes in that sense. And now you can look at the last cartoon. It may seem dull to you now, Harry, but at one time, everything in that book was breaking news. So the notes and the book that you are giving to the student was a breaking news for you, but not for the student. The teacher should be aware of this. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello.
Sir, dear participants, you can post your questions through the chat box. You can ask your doubts through the chat box.
Are there any questions? Chat. Are there any questions, Dr. Santosh? Are there any questions?
No, sir.
Questions have not come so far.
No, sir. Not yet.
I think people are thinking.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, participants asking the PPT, sir.
PPT can be shared. There is one
question, sir.
From Dr. Ginu George. 1 minute. Foucault, whose ideas had led to a new historicist perspective, seems to talk about past only as a representation. From a historian's perspective, do you think he has paved the way to lessen the authority of history, the discipline of history as one among the truths and not as the truth? Yeah, of course. No, I agree fully with Foucault's perspective in that sense. Because Foucault was following a postmodernist method in showcasing the importance of statements made by historians also from the point of view of text. Every text is a representation, right? When you write a history text, it's only a representation. You are using certain words, you are using certain logic in order to project a perspective. Ultimately, it is a perspective. You cannot say that it is a truth. I can explain this with the help of a document, for example, just a document which was written by a colonial officer during the Malabar Rebellion of 1921. Will the colonial officer write it as a problem that is connected to the colonial governance? Will they critique their tax policy or agrarian exploitation in Malabar? They will be picturizing and pointing to the community who made the riot as a riot makers. They will not be picturized as people who fought for freedom, people who fought for freedom from economic or exploitation of taxation or feudalism in that sense. Because there was a convergence of opinion, there was a convergence of agreement between the colonizer and the landed gentry in Malabar. So every document produced by the colonizer will have a paradigm and a episteme that is reflected in that. That is the colonial episteme. The template of the empire is there. So while the historian is doing work on that and representing the work, when he say that, when the historian is saying that it is, actually the colonizer was trying to suppress the riot makers and bring back law and order, based on the record. The record is supposed to, if you follow the Rangian dictum, the record is supposed to be sacred. You can recreate the past exactly from that, replicate the past. So if the historian is writing something like that, how can that be true? It is only a perspective. I'm not saying that it is a lie. It's only a perspective. So every time when the historian uses this, 1 minute, let me stop this from the phone. Otherwise it is echoing. So when the historian tries to interpret the text, it becomes an interpretative kind of history only. History produced is definitely not the interpretation. It's just which we can text is in order to democratically transmit the values of history. That is what we should learn from Foucault. Thank you, Gino, for the question. One question from Shibu TS. Sir, please explain transdisciplinary again. Okay, I think that I went through all these disciplinary practices in much speed to finish the topic. Transdisciplinary is different from interdisciplinary. You are creating a pool of knowledge, a collection of knowledge through integration and synthesization of knowledge. Okay, through multidisciplinary, pluridisciplinary, or cross-disciplinary, or interdisciplinary. All these pools of knowledge create a unity of knowledge in that sense. Okay, right? There is a complex network of knowledges which can be considered as a unified pool in that sense. What happens in transdisciplinary is that without going back to the individual disciplines, the particular knowledge is transmitted into the society for the benefit of the society in one way. So transdisciplinary is liberatory. It can be emancipatory type of a knowledge system, a knowledge approach. Secondly, one example of transdisciplinary phenomena is that once transdisciplinary exercises happen, it may also critique the present policies. It will definitely come to the present. What is produced by the historian, economist, the sociologist will come to the present. And in a converging point, this becomes a pool of knowledge that can be used for any kind of reforms which are beneficial for the society. So in transdisciplinary approach, the knowledge becomes that much organic. I think this explanation is clear for you. You can ask me a question if you want again, if any explanation from this. Sir, you have expounded various types of discipline. Excellent, but want to know your views on disciplines nowadays. Leave it if it is outside purview of this lecture. No question is outside the purview of this lecture. I understand, I don't know what I understand from your text. The indiscipline in the discipline is very much there. It is a phenomenon these days. And the indiscipline in the discipline happens because of the ignorance of the stakeholders of education, the major stakeholders of education, mainly the teaching folk. They are not understanding the value of education and history education. Then they are indisciplined. They are not understanding what is interdisciplinarity. They're ignorant about that. Okay, you know the basic simple dictum that ignorance is not an excuse. So if they continue with this kind of ignorance, then that ignorance lead to indiscipline. That is definitely a thing that is to be seriously dealt with. This is not outside the purview of this lecture. What I was trying to point out is the generation of a particular discipline, not the discipline, subject discipline, a discipline. That means your trait, your characteristic, your behavioral pattern, which also says that you belong to a particular academic folk, which determines the culture tag of the particular academician in you belonging to a particular fraternity. So when you have no discipline, it means you are ignorant of many things. Many such teachers and researchers and students make problems in the discipline. It is not the indiscipline in the way of not coming to the college regularly. All these people come to the college regularly, but they are highly indisciplined because they don't understand the basic character and nature of the discipline. This is the discipline, this is the indiscipline, which is of it's something like an academic toxic indiscipline in that sense. Thank you for the question. Okay, right. Manikandan, that's not a question. Yeah, then Saumen Bhattacharya, he has asked one question. She has asked one question. Is there any basic difference between interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary? Yes, that's what I was explaining. Interdisciplinary leads to integration and creation of a new discipline, as Roland Barthes said. Secondly, interdisciplinary leads to a higher level of cognitive understanding of a problem, which leads to a better understanding of one's own discipline. It strengthens one's own discipline in that sense. Two ways are there. That's why I referred to the definition of Klein and Neville that is coming after Roland Barthes, who said that it is through integration a critical problem in history is solved. Then that is interdisciplinary. But in multidisciplinary, you are choosing a particular problem, a perspective, just to illuminate and illustrate a problem that you are confronting in history. But of course, the elemental traits of your disciplines will be retained there. But when you look at the mentalities history, the elemental traits of history are retained. At the same time, that leads to a higher level of interpretation of miracle, a simple act, a touch of a sea and a dog in that sense. So that makes a difference between interdisciplinary and multidisciplinarity. And I have already told you by way of my presentation that multidisciplinarity is simply disciplinarity. It is disciplinarity itself. Multidisciplinarity existence of so many kind of disciplines. You can work with the history, but of course you can take certain cues from political science or economics. That doesn't mean that you are drawing inferences for integration, but only as external aids in that sense. That happens in multidisciplinarity. Thank you, Sauman Bhattacharya, for the question. Now, Joshi John has asked, this is a very long question. Students are familiarized with interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach. Our transdisciplinary is not that much concerned to students' approach on the subject. How to subject a transdisciplinary approach, you want to subject liberalize the narrow perspective to wider universal perspective. Does such attempt to create any conflicts on our students' existing understanding? No, transdisciplinary is liberatory. Transdisciplinary is more concerned with the extension of the discipline into the frontiers outside the academia. The academia is a particular cluster of a network of relations, human bondages and associations, which has got a particular cultural identity in that sense. But when this particular knowledge form transcends into the outside of the academia and reaches to the people by way of certain liberatory ideologies, through ideas, through concepts, which empower them, and it reaches the government in framing certain rules and regulations for the welfare of the people, for the emancipation of the poor people, for example, the marginalized people, like that, then that particular discipline becomes transdisciplinary. It is definitely, it definitely liberalizes the narrow perspective of the discipline, because the discipline, I don't mean that discipline history becoming utilitarian in that sense, but the value of the discipline is attested by the society. Then that discipline becomes very relevant in that sense, useful for the society in that sense. So in that sense, transdisciplinary even goes beyond interdisciplinary in integrating the discipline with the knowledge forms of people, direct to the people who are not affiliated to your discipline in any way, and to the government and policy makers who are not connected with your discipline and your art of doing things, your culture of doing things. So it permeates into the outside terrain and creates a different client system for the discipline. That is called a transdisciplinary. But it is not just economics only or history only or political science only. It leads to something like a unidisciplinary integration, unidisciplinary approach. All the disciplines come and people understand the unity of knowledge in some ways. So that is the importance of interdisciplinarity. Ashwin Kumar Dash has asked, my question is that how can we interrelate multidisciplinary during teaching of archaeological aspects of teaching history? Of course, because illustrating your point of view, for example, is suppose someone is doing something on a Sangam age, archaeological findings are very important. Then naturally the historian goes to the archaeological findings in order to illustrate his theory, in order to augment his theory in that sense. For example, as I said, the social formation theory of Tamil Nadu in that sense, But it doesn't mean that historian is going into the vortex of archaeology. Historian is not, making his subject subservient to archaeology. There is no question of subservience to archaeology, but drawing inferences and reference and data from archaeology to strengthen his own discipline. That is multidisciplinary. In that sense, archaeology is just a complementary, as I said, a co-host discipline from where the historian is drawing certain inferences which are essential for illustrating and expanding something that is belonging to his area of study. That is a very commonsensical and normal practice that we are doing. That is why it is multidisciplinary. Malaviga, particularly with regard to purview of topics covered from interdisciplinary analysis school to digital history. I have two questions, one pedagogical and other methodological. Okay. How does history teachers and historians deal with fake histories, particularly the ones gaining mileage through online social networks? Okay, that's a very important question, especially the online teaching scenario is have the potential of transmitting right kind of history at the same time wrong kind of history that existed even outside the purview of social networks. So these are to be, you have to use your own critical understanding. You have to look at the people who are associated with these histories. No, that's the basic thing that we do even in the kind of understanding textual histories. Okay. Right. So when you read a history textbook, naturally you look at the author. Who is the author? You have to locate the authorship of these social histories. You have to locate the production political context of these social histories. And you can definitely get disconnected from these type of social networks. I think that is your question. How does history teachers and students deal with fake histories, particularly for the ones gaining mileage through online social networks? And at the same time, the collective historians, perhaps the historians can make a collective of different historians to combat this kind of arguments which are coming in the social network, because what you implicate is the speedy transmission of certain knowledges which are rubbish and which are really rotten, which are really fabricated and falsified history. It is transmitted at a rapid pace. So only thing is that there should be general awareness that can be transmitted in the classrooms to dissociate with such social networks, to look into the production scenario or the context of such social networks, and naturally an individual can detach from that. At the same time, collectively, historians can also engage in generating spaces, digital spaces, which inculcate true value history, which inculcate critical history. If suppose there are contesting stations like that, then naturally people will not follow these kind of falsified social network spaces. So that is my answer for that. Malavika's second question comes, though interdisciplinary methods enhance insights of researcher engaged with any historical theme by adding the tools that he or she has his toolkit, does it not also lead to a shrinking of the discipline's rigor and veracity? No, I fully disagree with you. The veracity and the rigor of the discipline will be definitely that will be increased, that will be accentuated in the sense that, Malavika, the problem is not with, expanding simply a knowledge terrain or augmenting an argument. The problem is that where are you using this interdisciplinary practice? It doesn't mean that all the historians are going to use the interdisciplinary practice tomorrow. So only if you generate a research problem that can be addressed and resolved only through this kind of an interdisciplinary practice, you are going to engage that. So that will definitely. So it depends on the research problem. So what type of a problem that you are taking and how you are going to address the problem, whether you are going to address the problem through a multidisciplinary strategy or a monodisciplinary strategy or through an interdisciplinary method. So when you choose the interdisciplinary method, you should be in the know that your research problem is really different. You are not using that for fashion, but it is a research problem which can be explained only through an integration of methodologies and knowledge forms from different disciplines. So I don't think that will lead to a lessening or limiting the rigor and or vitality or vibrancy of the history. For instance, Hayden White's arguments on the topics of discourse about reduction of history to one among the many narratives with the reader misinterpreting all to be equally valid. Okay, yeah, Hayden White he's a different kind of historian. When you just refer to the theory of employment, because most of the theories which he has articulated in meta history need not be considered as truth in that sense. Hayden White never calls that, never says that whatever he says is truth, like Leopold von Ranke said. You can exactly replicate a past. And why are you so adamant? Hayden White asked the history teachers and researchers that you should read from 1 to 100 in a linear narrative. Why can't you go from 1 to 50, come back to 27 and go again to 100 and then come back to 2? What is significant there, whether the 1 or the 50 or 100? If the value of 1 is not significant, then how do you reach 100? You reach only 99. And then again, you look at the problem, and a problem of expanding the terrain of historiography. How do you understand progress? Do you think that the introduction of the innovation of laptop is the most significant innovation that the human race are accustomed delimiting and limiting the invention of fire as something secondary and backward in that sense? So Hayden White's theory that is connected to something like history, or is also something like a story in that sense. It's a different kind of story. He never says that it is based on imagination. He talks about recent imagination in that sense. And some of the theories of Ehrenreich, like the history of 40, for example, that led to revolutionary changes in historiography, understanding photos, understanding cinema as a text for understanding historical past. The whole film history emerges from the concept of history of 40. So this can be considered as a different kind of perspective that is coming up from Hayden White. I don't disagree with the rank. I don't disagree with Hayden White also. Thank you, Malavika, for the wonderful question. Remani Keke has asked, how much affect the interdisciplinary teaching in new education policy? In new education policy, see, lot of integrated forms of knowledge, integrated forms of approaches are outlined in the policy document, but how that is going to be implemented is the issue that is to be seen here. See, any implementation of this kind of interdisciplinary, methods without understanding the niceties and without understanding the academic standard of such methods will entail, which ultimately culminate in a wrong-sensical notion of interdisciplinarity. Of course, there are certain good strands which you can draw from the present new education policy. It all depends on the way in which that is implemented, under what context it is implemented. The text become relevant, that is NEP become relevant only within the context of the text. Now the NEP highlighted the importance of interdisciplinary across social sciences, humanities and sciences. What hindrance you think that might come across in delivering history content? See, regarding the history content, I am not of the view that history is going to stop. History is going to be dismissed as a subject in the universities and colleges. Every time history is to be revivified, it is to be restructured. Again, I am responding the same answer which I have already given. That is, this particular policy document is to be seen from the context of the text, and at the same time, it is to be understood only in the implementation level. Implementing interdisciplinarity is not an easy thing as the policy formulators think. Maybe for beautification and the aesthetics of the document, people may add this kind of an integration. But where it comes, where it happens, how it happens, only future can tell. I think, Santosh sir, I think questions are, Rashid Kaladi has asked one question. Is transdisciplinary dead the discipline itself? Is transdisciplinary dead the discipline? Is transdisciplinary dead the discipline itself? I don't understand the question. Perhaps you may be thinking that disciplinary practices will come to an end with the transdisciplinary processes. No. If only there is disciplinary practices, then transdisciplinary occurs. See, that is why different disciplines exist, and different disciplines create knowledge in different terrains, and that goes across to the public, across to the society, across to the governmental institutions. So transdisciplinary will never lead to the nullification of the discipline. It will only help understand the seriousness and significance of the discipline. Thank you. I think that's what you asked. It's not. That question is not clear in that sense. Thank you, Rashid, for your question. Is it over?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Sir?
There are no more questions, no?
No questions, sir.
Have you exceeded in time? Have you exceeded in time?
No problem, sir. That is the more or less we are towards the end of the session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
We are towards the end of the session. The presentation of Professor Sebastian Joseph has projected a message that interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach in the case of history leads to creativity. Suppose the teachers, history teachers are, so automatically we can become creative, and consequently consecutively, we can attain the exalted height both in our teaching and research. I am really thankful to Professor Sebastian Joseph for the unique and innovative presentation. Thank you, sir.
And I wish to thank Professor Shankari for organizing this, meticulously organizing this faculty development program, which I think that have found to be very useful for teachers from across the nation. And I also thank Santosh sir and Rajamani, both brilliant coordinators, technical coordinators of this session. Thank you, participants who have asked the questions and those who have also not asked questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.